In this fifth week of Lent, today's reading from John takes place after Jesus makes a big entrance into Jerusalem on what we now call Palm Sunday. Just before this entrance, Jesus had brought back to life his friend Lazarus and has had a nasty encounter with Judas over Mary's massaging Jesus' feet with a very expensive perfume. The Feast of Passover is just about ready to take place. All of Jerusalem is full of a buzz with locals and pilgrims from around the world. There is tension in the air with the fear that disturbances could easily bring the wrath of the Roman army upon them. Now, Jesus is staying in this small town of Bethany, just outside of Jerusalem. But going into town during the daytime, teaching and causing all sorts of distress with the religious leadership of the temple. In their opinion, Jesus could be the igniter to an all-out revolution against Rome, which would bring horrifying consequences to the population of Israel. There is no question in their minds that Jesus must be quieted, but how to do it without any repercussions by his followers was going to be tricky. It was obvious that Jesus was gaining much popularity. Even a number of foreigners, indicating non-Jews, were looking to visit with Jesus when they entered into the city. Now, a part of the Passover ritual was to go directly to the temple for a formal ritual cleansing before you could eat the Passover meal. By their seeking out Jesus' disciples and wishing to meet and speak with Jesus, instead of going directly to the temple, is a way that the author is telling us that they were recognizing God to be where Jesus was at, not in the temple. It is at this point, in front of these seekers, that Jesus makes this exclamation, saying, "Let me make this clear. I have come to fulfill my purpose, to offer myself to God." Jesus has just thrown down the gauntlet and has set into motion a chain of events that would ultimately take him to the cross. In Jesus' declaration of his intentions, he uses an example that any one of us who has grown up in an agricultural setting can easily identify with. Jesus uses the life cycle and purpose of a seed as a metaphor of the purpose of faith in one's own life. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus spoke about a farmer who went out and sowed seeds one day. And some of those, he was just broadcasting, fell on the hard path. Some into rocky soil and some into thistles, and then some into good, rich soil. The seed that fell in, the seed that grew into fruition was the seed in that good soil. It was in that soil that the seed was able to receive all of the things that it needed in order to grow and become what it was meant to be. We know that the seed, when it is planted, does not die, but rather the seed is alive, holding all of the potential of what it is meant to be. What I really appreciated about This morning's children time was the explanation about how the seed had to die to its original form in order to be a new form, to grow and to be productive. Like a grain seed, you can just take the seed, grind it up, and make bread, which will give nourishment. But then that is its end of its offering. And in the same way, a coconut can be opened and the meat of the coconut eaten, raw or used in cooking. There is a sweet liquid that is inside the coconut pod, which can quench one's thirst. And from a musician's heart, this coconut pod can also be used as a sound maker. But that's all that it can do if that seed is not allowed to grow and morph into that form of a plant that will produce multiple coconuts. The seed represents a life form. When Jesus is speaking about the seed, he is speaking about the God life that is planted inside each of us. And the idea of dying to self really is a way of saying that we recognize this God life within us, and in that recognition, allowing it to change our being, to become the active within God's creation. It is allowing this light of truth and justice, of living in grace, and allowing mercy to be the predominant behavior within our life. It allows us to live our lives in harmony with the divine that exists within each of us. Jesus, as a seed, understood his purpose, which was to offer himself to God. For Jesus, his expression of that purpose was to speak out against the injustices of his day, to literally be seen as a voice against Rome. He was able to see this purpose because he had allowed his seed of faith to grow into what would glorify God's name. As children of God, as the seed which has a greater purpose than a one-time use, we too have a purpose. The same purpose as Jesus. That purpose is to offer ourselves to God. We all will have differing paths in which we will live out that divine that is in each of us. And here's the point. In order to allow that divine within us to grow, we must let our inner form give way to a new form, which will then produce much fruit. When we plant a seed into the ground, it doesn't just produce a new plant the next day. There is a waiting period before we begin to see those shoots of the plant popping up out of the soil. Then again, we have to wait for that plant to grow larger and stronger. And after more waiting, then we can begin to see the beginnings of the fruit on that plant. And more waiting comes as that fruit grows into its maturity. Then, when it is picked, that seed of the fruit starts the cycle all over again. Waiting is the predominant time frame in this whole process. In Isaiah, we are told, "They who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength." Now, waiting has a number of meanings within the Hebrew language, but the most common meaning is to twist, stretch, or put under tension. This is a concept very much given to that idea of childbirthing. My spiritual mentor, Reverend Dr. Rodney Romney, writes, "When we wait for God, we have no guarantee what will happen. Real life is always lived somewhere between knowing and not knowing, having and not having. The energy for growth comes from the pull of the opposing parts of our experience. And waiting is where we find the exhilaration for keeping on rather than dropping out." After Jesus announced his purpose, there was the voice of God that stated, "And I will glorify my name through you again." Two things about this statement, this proclamation, this pronouncement. Some heard this voice of God as just thunder in the sky. Others heard it as the voice of God. This is a statement about how we recognize God acting and speaking within our lives. For some of us, we see God in everything that is happening. And for some of us, we hear only noise. And the second thing from that comes in the words, "And I will glorify my name through you again." I believe this to be a calling to each of us. Jesus told his disciples that after he dies, that they will be doing greater things than what he did. We as disciples have the capacity to glorify God's name as much as did Jesus. But we have to take that seed inside of us and let it grow into what it is meant to be. In Jesus' words, "If you want to be my disciple, follow me and you will go where I am going. And if you truly follow me as my disciples, the Father will shower his favor upon your life." The question from Jesus to us is, what will you do with your seed? Amen.